This episode's made possible by Planful. Hello, on today's episode of Planning Aces, we'll be featuring FP&A insights and commentary from three finance leaders, including CFO Regi Vengalil of Trax Retail, CFO Matt Steinfort of DigitalOcean, and CFO Isabelle Winkles of Braze. This is Jack Sweeney, your co-host, along with performance management guru Brett Knowles, who will serve as our resident thought leader as we together seek to highlight the takeaways from our distinguished group of Planning Aces. We will begin after this.
Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report more accurately? Here's what sets Planful apart. Imagine purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Planful in just weeks and with minimal IT involvement, so you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business on your key financial progress. Best of all, Planful grows with you. Its unparalleled scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Planful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to planful.com/CFO Thought Leader to see how you can reach peak financial performance with Planful.
Hi, it's Jack, and I'm here with Brett Knowles. And Brett, I should apologize. I didn't give you a heads up. We changed our platform, our podcasting platform, to something called Riverside. And this is not an endorsement. We're gonna check it out. We're gonna give it a trial here.
I wasn't even thinking my little tiny dinosaur brain when I saw Riverside. I went, well, I was just looking for their logo. Who knows? Anyways, I'll just go talk to Jack now. And it was in and out of that in basket pretty darn quick. Well, congratulations. Look at this. I can actually use my fancy Dan camera, my fancy Dan microphone, my fancy Dan speakers. It's awesome.
And that's not all. No, I have something else I want to share with you. I think you'll find this interesting. So I was using ChatGPT, and I shared the clips that we'll be playing from the three planning aces, the three finance leaders we'll be featuring on this show today. And I asked ChatGPT, what would be a logical sequence? Which planning ace should go first? Who's second? Who's third? And I just want to read to you what it shared back to me. By arranging the CFO comments in the following order, the episode will logically progress from the foundational concept of setting constraints, Matt Steinfort, to aligning those constraints with reliable data, Regi Vengalil, and finally, to implement these strategies through real-time collaboration and education, Isabelle. So there you have it. It told me what it believed the order of our planning aces should be. Now, we're not going to necessarily use that order. In fact, I don't think we will, but it made me think you have been rather advanced in terms of the types of questions you've been asking it all along, which are applicable to the things that you're up to and top of mind for you. Whereas what I do, I've just really become much more experimental, I guess, only in the last 60 days. And now it's an immediate impulse. I wonder if I asked it to do this.
And even the questions you ask the CFOs need to be different. Like, the questions no longer need to be, have you experimented or something? It's, what's your greatest AI story? Or, what aha has AI given you this week? Like, I think it's moved to that.
It's happening very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. A year ago, I was just trying to bully you into, adding something about AI. And now it's assume it's commonplace and try to find a catch that level beyond.
And I do believe if I can just nail like what you're suggesting, it's about the questions about how to get them to open up and answer a question that's timely because things are moving so quickly here. I'm in a unique position to discover something about that's not going to be widely reported on.
And that's how middle market firms are really they're becoming these laboratories for generative AI breakthroughs. Think about it. They have all these different management teams, all these different creative minds that have just such different business experiences doing what I was just describing, experimenting and exploring and discovering how to enhance and do their jobs differently. And if a business is going to advance into the future, it has to be exploring. Its management team has to be exploring. Its employees, right, have to be exploring. And just to, always have that healthy dose of paranoia that certain business models are just going to be put by the wayside, as I think we're all thinking about the nature of our own businesses and what you shared about even the consulting model, a number of months back.
Oh yeah. Well, there's no question that I'm a dinosaur. Like that, the meteorite has hit the planet, and I'm just waiting for the dust storms to come my way. One of the things we used to do is help customers identify their possible key results. Well, these days, all you got to do is, feed in what your objective is, give it a sheet of all the data you have available, just a spreadsheet, not even the numbers, just a list of all the measures that are available, and say, hey, chat, suggest 10 measures for an objective of double my sales. And it will come back based on the data that you have. And it can also come back and say, this is data you don't have that you might want to consider hunting down that would help you out. Oh, crap. That goes, a full day's worth of someone on my team's work in 12 nanoseconds. And I hate to add in probably better quality than my person would have provided. And, you could apply that in the FP&A area. I mean, that's an actual use of artificial intelligence, which is given the objectives that our business plan is trying to achieve, given the available data, what would an FP&A plan look like? And AI is going to come back, and if you don't manage the prompt, it comes back with what I call 226. 2 ideas are boneheaded, like where they come from. 2 ideas you already thought of, and 6 ideas that you can't implement, but make you scratch the chin and go, gosh, that's an interesting idea. What if, right? And you can either constrain it by saying this is the current FP&A model, the current data we have, or you could give it an unconstrained, which is pretend we didn't have any limitations. What should we look for? Or a mix between the two. So again, the things that we used to do as a strategic partner in FP&A, we can do now just using chat, or more interestingly, that internal department lead can do it themselves. That internal department lead can go, the strategy says I got to cut the time to develop a new product in half. What would that FP&A model look like, given this is what the product development cycle is, these are steps, these are processes, these are measures, these are current stats. And it can literally come back with the FP&A model in about 12 nanoseconds. Interestingly enough, it relates to the 3 speakers we have.
Wow. Well, thank you for that lead in. Our first planning ace will be Regi Vengalil, CFO of Trax Retail, from episode 1037. Just to tip his hand a little bit, Regi focuses on establishing a baseline of reliable data accessible to all stakeholders, preventing the organization from debates driven by outdata and what he calls inconsistent information. Here is Regi Vengalil.
Yeah, it starts with, and this is why I started there, it starts with having reliable data that everyone can look at the same facts and figures together. Folks might have different perspectives about it, but if we're using the same, base support of data, it allows that to not be the source of debate. And when you're closing, in 2 months, it can be the source of debate because data can be out of date, if you will, and not as relevant to be making decisions. So first was establishing the baseline of data, and then second, in general, my experience is everyone's trying to do the right thing for the company, and the previous bias might have been towards growth versus margin. And so it was a little bit about resetting everyone's expectations towards what the new goals and priorities were. And I think it resonated with everyone of the reorientation of, hey, we were here and now we're trying to go here. And so it wasn't as difficult a conceptual. The execution of it was obviously challenging for the teams to kind of deliver against, but the concept of what we were trying to accomplish, I think, as long as it was on a clear baseline of data, that was the part that I think oriented people. So having the right set of data and having clear expectations and goals about where we were trying to go were essential to kind of getting everyone to the table. And then it was more of an informed discussion about what is the right minimum margin for a deal and where would we make exceptions and trade-offs. And I think that was able to get folks at the table to be committed to a minimum margin, but recognize for the right strategic or longer term relationship, we would make exceptions to that. Yeah, it was actually the FP&A team was probably 2/3 outsourced at the time, and it was a part of a team location transition that had led to that. I had never seen that before, and so it was really important for me that the finance, the FP&A function is such a strategic function, and so bringing in-house those resources to really be the kind of financial voice of the company to help guide each of the functions on both tracking to how they're doing to plan, but also help them make day-to-day decisions. That was a really important part. And I think, to be fair to the teams that were there, they had consultants effectively providing them that support with out-of-date data. So it's consultants with out-of-date data. You can imagine why they didn't always have a finance person at the table. And so for me, it was key to change both of those things, right? It needed to be your trusted partner that you knew was going to be there tomorrow, and they had reliable data that you could partner with to help make better decisions.
That was, again, Regi Vengalil. If I was writing an article about what Regi just shared, I would insert a pull quote, and that's that comment sometimes that you see across a magazine page, the quote, the money quote, sometimes it's called. It would be, Regi told us, having reliable shared data isn't just about accuracy. It's about aligning the organization to make informed decisions and reset priorities effectively. Brett, what say thee?
I agree. In that conversation, it begins to tease us about how it is that you think about FP&A. And a lot of his conversation was about, resetting what he inherited as he took over the business and resetting the baseline, resetting the goals that you talked about. Also establishing the baseline. We always find it incredibly interesting how many businesses agree a certain metric is absolutely critical, or what you and I have talked about in terms of their sort of magic metric, but they don't know what the baseline is. And that's incredibly interesting. The part that was kind of a curveball for me is when he didn't blame, but he mentioned that 2/3 of his FP&A team was outsourced. And that was probably, the implication was, why we didn't have the right goals and why we didn't, or the metrics, and why we didn't have those baselines. And he talked about bringing it in-house. And again, if I listen to that conversation, and I think the one that you and I just had about AI, you kind of go, well, what did that in-house team bring that AI would not have brought? And if you used AI, would that have changed your decision about whether I needed to bring them in-house? So we don't know why they were outsourced in the first place. It might have been cost. It might have been they couldn't hire them, whatever it might be. But he was talking about basically, how do I manage the capacity to deliver what I want? And of course, the clear and present danger these days is AI. And AI is just a chunk of capacity that's different than we had to worry about, whether it was in-house or outsourced. And so, again, it's what wasn't said that made me scratch my head. Like, if you're struggling with this, Reggie, did you try using AI to solve the equation, that optimization equation that you're looking for, the right metrics?
Don't you outsource? You can outsource accounting, but isn't FP&A sort of the brains, the engine underneath the model? Or?
Yeah, you'd think that you're accidentally giving away the secret sauce because the planning is the enacting of the strategy through resources. So the issue is McDonald's has the same strategy effectively as Burger King, as Arby's, as all the other fast food joints. It's all about how they execute the culture and exactly how they resource what part of the flow. So FP&A is a critical component to the secret sauce that leads to competitive success, even in tight markets like those I just mentioned. So the fact it was outsourced, again, makes you wonder. As I said, was that a cost reduction thing? Maybe they did a merger and neither team sort of, like, it's hard to tell. He didn't mention what it was. The conversation that interested me is his solution was to bring it in-house. If I were in his boots today, my solution wouldn't be to bring it in-house. My solution would be to say, maybe I don't need the outsourced people and I can do the same planning with the 1/3 that's currently in-house and just quit the outsourced part. You should stop and think about whether I need to solve it the way I used to solve it.
That you can, as we've discussed, and so many of us have learned how to prompt it in different ways. There's a give and take there that a lonely CFO is looking to hire that senior financial mind as he steps through the door. Well, there's a substitute. It might, like you said, give it 12 more months. We'll see where we are.
Right. So the constraint is this. The constraint is AI doesn't do creativity. So you're limited by how good your prompt is that you give it, but also the available database. So the example I think of is, think of Uber. Like 10 years ago, Uber didn't exist. Now, the situation existed. There are millions of dollars of cars sitting on sidewalks, adding no value. There's also thousands of people hanging around coffee shops looking for shit to do. Well, I don't think AI would have joined those two dots and come up with a model for Uber. In hindsight, it's perfectly logical. You or I could have come up with that, but someone had that little grain of creativity to go connect the dots, understand the business model. I don't think AI is at that point yet. Through prompts, you can bounce ideas off this tool. So you come up with a business model at 2:00 in the morning. I can bounce it off and I get 300,000 years of experience bounced back at me. But it's a mirror reflecting what I put into it, not giving you a different image back than what I created. So that's where the limitation is. Now, that's better than nothing. But if I go back to the model of what I might have done in Reggie's world, to said, well, 2/3 of what FP&A do is just logical execution. I can do that through AI. The 1/3 of a person to bounce ideas off and have creative thoughts and extrapolation, that's a 1/3 of people I'm going to leave in-house. So I just get rid of the 2/3 that outsource, replace that with chat. Bob's your uncle. Now, it's a simple model, but I'm saying we can't keep solving today's problems with yesterday's frameworks. We've got new tools at our disposal. AI brings something different to the table. It doesn't bring everything, but it brings stuff that I can get rid of, waste time, wasted resources. Think of the example we just talked about. So the executive comes up with a strategy idea at 2:00 in the morning. Right now, all she or he does is write a note on the bedside table, go back to sleep, call a meeting for the executives in the morning and drag them through a thought process. What she or he can now do is go to chat at 2:00 in the morning and say, what would need to be true for this to work? What parts of this would fail in today's economy? What would my competitors do if I did this? And literally by 6:00 in the morning, she or he's had, thousands and thousands of hours of thought put into the model. And what she or he presents to the team at 9:00 in the morning is way more thought out, articulated, and refined than what he would have had before. Now, it's unbounded by the constraints of the resources and the personalities and the culture of the business. But hopefully they bring that to the table with their brain. And I have a very different conversation with that team in the morning.
we had another conversation from episode 1029 with Matt Steinfort, CFO of DigitalOcean. And some of what Matt shared just talked about how finance really had to play a very active role in shaping the planning process. Or forgive me, did you want Isabelle Winkles of Braze to go next?
I do. Let's hear what Matt has to say.
Great. Here is Matt Steinfort, CFO of DigitalOcean.
So, and it's ironic because we just talked earlier about, my whole career was in challenged industries. So, telecom, during the telecom meltdown, sell into, a VC-backed company in 2008 when the financial crisis hit. Sequoia sent out its famous presentation saying, VCs, you should close down half of your portfolio companies and the other half, you should tell them to cut half their expenses right now. So I've always lived and worked in constrained environments. Constraints are like, you don't have everything you need. You got to figure out how to get by. You have to scrape. So my lesson, my finance insight was how powerful that having a constraint can be in the strategic planning process. And I learned it the hard way. It wasn't a big mistake, but it wasted some time for sure. So right after we went private, so I'd been a CFO for only 3 years, and I'd only been a private company CFO now for a year. We had just changed most of the leadership team, transitioned, as oftentimes they do when you do a take private. I was the only C-level executive left. We brought on a new CEO. That CEO brought on some new executives. We're all fired up and excited about all the things they could do with this great platform that we had. We had 2 large private equity firms that owned us 50% each, and they were really excited about all the things that we could do. And so we went through the strategic planning process, for the annual plan. And I was a participant in that. And we even hired one of the big 3 consulting firms that I had come from that space, who came in and helped us think through, like, hey, you should reinvent your operating model, and they can kind of blow up the structure. Let's just say we had a lot of people with a lot of ideas, and we had a lot of fresh capital that had just come into the company. And so we went through the budget planning process, and I was involved, and I was steering the process, and I was I don't know what the right word is, but let's just say I was very supportive of their energy and saying, hey, well, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, we could do this, we could do that. And so when we put the initial plan together, I hadn't given them any constraints. I basically said, well, I just want to hear. I don't want to be the person who's saying, no, you can't do it. I don't want to be the person who is I've been at this company and everything we do is the right way. So I was open to all their ideas. When we rolled up what they wanted to do, it was a nonsensical and ridiculous plan. It was like double the company and people, and the payback would have been forever. And I looked at them like, well, that was a waste of a planning cycle. It was like a month, just a complete waste, because I'm like, the plans we got back, because they weren't constrained in any way, were again nonsensical. And I'm thinking, my first reaction was, well, why wouldn't they just be reasonable? And then my second reaction was, dummy, that's your job. It's like, your job is to put constraints on them and to give them some kind of guidelines so that they know, in which the realm of the envelope that they're working. And people make better decisions when they're constrained because they have to make trade-offs. If they don't have constraints, then every idea is a good idea. And so they don't work as hard, and they're not as creative, and they're not as thoughtful. People tend to do their best work when and most innovative and creative work, when you're like, okay, we've got a limited amount of time, we've got a limited amount of money, and we got to get this done. We're going to be audacious, but we're constrained. And that's something that has stuck with me. Let's just say that now the people in my world, they understand that I appreciate constraints because I give them a lot. Yeah, they're very clear. I mean, we need to get growth back. We're growing in the low teens. We need to get growth, up into the high teens or into the 20s. The market is growing 23%. We should be growing that fast. How we're going to do that is we're going to improve NDR, which is getting our existing customers to spend more with us, and the finance organization plays a big role in understanding what's going on with those customers and trying to identify those customers that have a higher propensity to buy. And so we're doing a lot of analytics work, working with the go-to-market organization. We're also spending on this new AI business. As I said, we grew ARR 200% in the second quarter, and there's a lot of investment that needs to go into that. And so we're very focused on, okay, what's the right capital allocation strategy? And we're sitting on a ton of cash, and we generate a ton of cash, and what's the best use of that cash across buying back shares or repurchasing our debt or investing in AI capacity. So it's really about enabling the company to grow and doing it in a kind of cash flow optimized way and driving free cash flow per share, which is our kind of our anchor metric.
Yeah, that was Matt Steinfort again from episode 1029 of CFO Thought Leader. My pull quote, Brett, from Matt would be, he says, "Constraints aren't obstacles. They're powerful tools that force us to make thoughtful trade-offs and drive better, more realistic strategic planning."
I say a tu brute, then die Caesar. The next part was the critical part, I thought, and caught me right in the heart, which was, and consultants don't have constraints. Therefore, they can't do FP&A because they don't worry about trade-offs when they come back with their recommendations, right? He tells a story about bringing in one of the big consulting firms, of which he used to be part of. And the dilemma was their strategy ideas didn't have any constraints and therefore were completely useless to them. It was just a crazy plan that made no sense. Yeah. Oh, that guy Jack put this guy in here just to kick me in the butt. But what's interesting, where it relates to where I was going with Regi and AI is AI can use constraints. So it's not, you could leave it to be zero-based if you wanted to, but if you understood what the constraints were of your business, that could be part of the prompt, part of the equation that you give it to optimize. So, and probably do that in a more mindful way in this example than the consultant, right? So the consultant is Regi's case of an outsourced person. And again, how is it, and Matt's answer was don't use outsourced people, in this case, consultants, because they don't have constraints. Now he's given us something to work with. How is it I could replace that consultant with another resource without having to hire someone? The answer is AI give it some constraints. Right? So then he said, well, here's an example. I needed to find customers that had a higher propensity to buy. If that's not an AI question, I don't know what is. Part of the dilemma that we have with even that conversation that you're saying you have with the leadership team about FP&A is a couple of things. Thing one is we're always playing the political game. I know what the CEO's pet projects were or way they've invested their money and so on. AI plays like the emperor has no clothes. It doesn't care if the idea is the CEO's or not. It's going to give it appropriate feedback and scenarios where it fail and pass and so forth. It's going to come up with ideas not constrained by what the leadership team likes or doesn't like. Now, that can be good, bad, or indifferent, but the bottom line is we impose constraints on the system, our invisible biases that we're not even aware of. The constraints that he's talking about with a consultant, we happen to be aware of. What's interesting about AI is it doesn't have the invisible biases and constraints and can give us an answer that's provocative that you go, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Why? Because I have all these biases in my brain that I'm not explicit about and therefore had sub-optimized the possibilities. So something like finding customers that have a higher propensity to buy, there's a whole bunch of data that maybe the team's looking at, maybe it's not. Maybe a propensity to buy is merely being in the right geography. Maybe the propensity to buy is in an income bracket or a previous purchase, or there's a million other things you could look at that might give us that propensity to buy. Do you think his team did as exhaustive an investigation as AI might have, given we give it the right constraints to look at and is not bounded by constraints that we have that are invisible? A possibility of doing what he described using AI completely, it adds gas to the fire. It allows him to get done what he wants to get done a million miles faster. He identified what the problem was, which was an unconstrained thought, applied constrained thought within a specific problem. Then you've got an interesting way forward.
So where is the event horizon here? Where does AI begin to let us down?
I would argue that it currently dropped the ball, and this podcast is going to be out of date in 8 months' time. Currently, it drops the ball because it's not that human sounding board. It's not that human creativity that allows your imagination to extend into all sorts of interesting places. It is restricted by what has already occurred and the constraints that you give it in the prompt.
Nice. In fact, let's keep that in mind as we tee up our next planning ace, who is Isabelle Winkles, CFO of Braze. Just in regards to the FP&A professionals on your team, how do you have a philosophy about how you use them, where you do and where you don't? What's a good use of their time?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that has evolved at Braze over the last couple of years in a really kind of cool and interesting way. So I always like to say that CFOs are not necessarily here to say, you can definitely do this and you can definitely never do this. It's never a blanket yes or a blanket no. Now, of course, if we're going to do something that's going to be, hugely detrimental to the organization, I'm obviously going to raise the red flag. However, I believe that the CFO's actual function is to bring to light and quantify the implication of various choices that are available to us. And then around the table with all the right decision makers, we as a leadership team can collectively decide which direction do we go? How much do we invest? Where do we invest? What is the totality of kind of the Braze animal look like over time? And so I think the FP&A team is a critical calculator and strategic partner in helping bring to life exactly what the implication of some of these choices are. There's a second aspect to the FP&A team, which is they are direct partners to the business to help them understand how are they actually deploying the resources that are at their disposal. And so how are they tracking on their budgets? And you can do this in a couple of different ways. You can have a cadence that says, hey, we're going to have a look back at the end of every quarter, and then we're kind of going to grade you on how you did relative to what we said you should do. Or we can sit side by side with you month over month and do variance analyses every month and elucidate where you're doing well, where you're coming short, where you're deploying what we would expect you would deploy, where you're deploying too much or too little, and redirect on a much more real-time basis. And so I've definitely pushed our organization more towards quicker twitch reporting, more scenario analysis, more what ifs, and more direct, partnership with the business heads so that we can be making decisions in real time, as opposed to just a look back that then says, okay, well, here's where you succeeded and where you failed, and better luck next time.
The company a little differently about it might be just a functional area that you drew their attention to this number and said, you folks really need to understand this better and why, and whether it changed the behaviors as you made that effort. Anything you could share?
Absolutely. This is a great question. It's really interesting for an organization like Braze. And it's going to seem like a very obvious metric when I say it, but I'll explain why it was so important to educate, particularly our sales organization. So the metric is revenue. And if you are a salesperson, you typically live in this land of bookings, of sales. How much business did I close? What is the size of the contracts that I executed? And there's a lot of stuff, sort of the details within that you're kind of like, yeah, okay, well, I've given the customer X amount of time to pay. The contract start date is over here at a different time frame. There's all these terms and conditions that I had to agree to. None of that matters. I just booked a contract worth $1 million. That's fantastic. And I had to go through a lot of education actually with the sales team to explain how the structure of a contract and actually the terms and conditions can vastly change that $1 million value to the company and how that turns into actual revenue. And so to me, being able to educate the sales team very specifically on how sales becomes revenue. A very simple example here is if I book $1 million contract, but the start date isn't for another 3 months, well, I'm paying the salesperson on that commission pretty soon, but I don't start recognizing revenue for 3 more months until the start date of that contract has actually passed us. And so that is that's a concession that we've made, and we're paying the individual who booked the contract, but the company is not actually seeing any of the financial benefit on that. And oh, by the way, we don't invoice our customers until that start date has passed, which means we're not collecting the cash associated with that. So again, a mismatch between cash walking out the door and cash walking in the door. And there's a number of nuances there that I think a salesperson, it's not really their job to be educated on that. It's not their education. It's probably not their background. But I thought that was an important piece of strategic knowledge that a sales team should understand, so that we could all be aligned and that salespeople were out there building and selling contracts that add the most value to the organization from a public metric perspective.
My favorite quote from Isabelle: finance should illuminate the implications of choices, partnering in real time with the business to make informed decisions, not just say yes. That was what she shared. But what did you make of all of what Isabelle shared?
I think that dirty rotter, because that quote speaks exactly to what I was alluding to before we listened to her, which is with whatever data we put in front of the team, we still need the magic of the individual creativity, that strategic partner. And strategic partner is kind of clever words to say, I want someone with whom I can have an interesting conversation that isn't going to just say yes or no, but is going to challenge, poke, provoke, look for the event horizons, look for how we can move beyond what we've done before. And she talks about how to effectively deploy the resources that you're given. So, we live in a constrained world. There's only so many people that we have. There's only so much budget I can spend. So how is it I can deploy those more effectively and move them closer to real time? So one of the problems we have in FP&A is we seem to have a planning season, right? It's September, October. I'm busy doing my planning for next year, but the world changes, moves every single day. It's artificial to only take a look once a year. And so, for example, the OKR world, we kind of say, well, you need to look at least once a quarter. But in truth, even once a quarter is not fast enough for some businesses. And she talks about moving towards real time. She uses the expression of we're trying to build quick twitch business heads. And again, this all points to AI, because AI looks at your data 7x24. And if you ask it correctly, it will look for trigger points. What if something happens beyond your acceptable threshold? It better trigger some sort of refresh conversation about budget. And the dilemma is we're all undergoing information overload. Our little tiny human brains can't possibly look at everything that's going on, both the known and unknown. AI can look at both the known, the stuff that you built in your plan, and the unknown stuff, that stuff that you didn't build in your plan that's going on. So maybe your plan doesn't have anything about customer complaints, but suddenly customer complaints are going up. AI is going to notice that and say, don't know what's going on here, but this is what I noticed. And when we see that, you can even set a prompt to say, well, look for anything that might have happened a week before that increase in complaints. Doesn't find anything. Look for 2 weeks before that. Doesn't find. And eventually, in one case, we went to 6 weeks and it found an activity that had gone on. A particular product began getting sold. And guess what? The average elapsed time between sales and implementation was 4 weeks. So that was enough time for the sale to happen. The stuff got implemented. People tried turning it on, had a bunch of problems. Complaints start coming in. That's not part of the model, but AI found the unknown strategy, unknown activities, unknown data, and identified something that we could look at. So her idea of moving towards real time, again, we're constrained right now because using manual processes and planning tools and planning seasons and cycles. How do we get past that? And again, her constraint is we're thinking about doing it with people. Well, what if you didn't have that constraint and used AI? Where would that take you? Well, so a further thought on Isabelle is she used an interesting example because she talked about revenue. And in her particular example is a cycle time or the elapsed time between when something's sold and perhaps we commission a salesperson and when accounting allows us to recognize a revenue. And, part of that was a broken system. Like if there's that amount of time between what the salesperson gets commissioned on and when the company recognizes revenue, maybe you should change your commission system. Because what you're really doing is you're funding that elapsed time, or work on compressing the elapsed time so that you're not funding the commission for as long. So there's some broken process stuff there as well. But she used it as a conversation to talk about building strategic knowledge. I would argue that's building just process knowledge. If I was to keep drumming the same drum I've been hitting, what would AI do with that problem? Well, AI would, again, look at what the issues are and figure out, help us figure out what the optimal solution is. Is it change the commission system? Is it change the elapsed time? Is it to change where we recognize a sale? There's a bunch of options that are available that we don't have enough data to answer in this podcast. So, for example, it's just as likely that her company might be recognizing revenue too early, because if there's that elapsed time between the 2 points, maybe the person could back out without any financial repercussions, in which case it wasn't really a sale. It was call it something else, a book. Anyways, so the dilemma is we can't solve the problem for Isabelle. What I'm looking at is she had some really good points about moving towards real time. Then she gives us an example where it's not real time, where things are out of sync, talks about what that might mean. The final point that I think she makes that is important is that, her quote early in the message, the interview was, the CFO needs to bring life to choices, right? To me, that word is all about the creativity, about the reality, and so on. That's the part that we need to focus our FP&A methodologies and processes around, because the technology, the technical part now is getting easier and easier. We actually don't even need people to get that done. And in fact, our internal customers can do it themselves. They don't need even us as FP&A. Where they need us is to bring life to their choices. They need that strategic partner.
Well, we'll have to end on that note. You wound the clock down for us, Brett. And let's thank our planning aces, CFO Regi Vengalil of Trax Retail, CFO Isabelle Winkles of Braze, and CFO Matt Steinfort of DigitalOcean. For myself and Brett Knowles at Planning Aces, and of course CFO Thought Leader, thank you for joining us.